Hello everyone, thank you for being here for a reading of Sonny's Blues, written by James Baldwin. This video starts with an original summary and analysis of the story, created and thought of by me to get around YouTube's reuse content policy on videos, so I'm calling out the timestamp for the audiobook itself. The audiobook for the short story, Sonny's Blues, written by James Baldwin, starts at the timestamp right at about the 40-minute mark. Again, the audiobook for Sonny's Blues starts right about at the 40-minute mark. So in this way, the length of my original summary and analysis that I have created and conceived matches or exceeds the length of the reading, thereby adding significant commentary and additional educational value alongside the educational value of having the audiobook itself. There will also be one more piece of analysis following the reading of the audiobook. If this video helped you, or if you enjoyed it, please like it and subscribe to my channel. It helps me to be able to keep supporting you all. If you have any requests for short stories or poetry or summaries and analyses, please let me know in the comments. And just dropping a comment to say thanks or hi also greatly helps me out. Feel free to ask me any questions related to your homework that you think I can help with. Stay lit with Simply Lit. This is a summary of Sonny's Blues, written by James Baldwin. So, the story begins with the narrator, a Harlem school teacher, reading about his brother Sonny's arrest for heroin possession in the newspaper. He feels a mix of shock and shame and fear, but he also feels a sense of inevitability. He watches his students at school and he reflects on their bleak futures, comparing them to Sonny, his brother. He sees in them the same cycles of entrapment, poverty, systemic oppression, despair that shaped Sonny's life, his brother's life. Despite his concerns, the narrator does not immediately reach out to Sonny, showing that their relationship is strained. Later, the narrator recalls an encounter with one of Sonny's childhood friends, who was also a drug addict, shortly after Sonny's arrest. This interaction with Sonny's childhood friends deepens the narrator's discomfort and his guilt and his shame and his conflicted feelings over the whole thing. The friend's disheveled appearance and kind of odd demeanor are emblematic or meant or trying to show the devastating toll of addiction in their community. The friend speaks frankly about Sonny, explaining that heroin is a way to cope with the relentless pressures of life in Harlem. He says that without it, people like Sonny have to endure unimaginable suffering. The narrator, then, torn between judgment and pity, gives the friend money for drugs, a gesture that underscores his conflicted emotions and foreshadows, potentially, reconciliation with Sonny. However, not quite in that sense, because it's more complicated than that, for sure. But, one could take it as a potential context clues. The story shifts as the narrator reflects on his life, particularly the death of his 2-year-old daughter Grace from polio. Her death is a turning point that forces him to confront his emotions and reach out to Sonny. He writes Sonny a letter in prison expressing his condolences and a desire to reconnect. Sonny responds with his own heartfelt letter, expressing his gratitude and vulnerability. He speaks of the pain he has endured and the difficulty of facing life without the escape heroin provided. This correspondence, this letter writing, rekindles their relationship, and the narrator begins to reflect more deeply on his brother's life and his brother's experiences. When Sonny is released from prison, the narrator meets him at the subway station. The reunion is subdued, marked by a mix of both awkwardness and affection, and of course familial love. Sonny looks older and more worn, a visible reminder of his struggles. And as they walk through Harlem together, the narrator is struck by both the vibrancy, its beauty, but also its chaos, which evoke both nostalgia and sorrow. The setting becomes a character in its own right, reflecting the tension between the community's cultural richness and the systemic impression that stifles its residents. The narrator observes Sonny closely, trying to understand the man his brother has become. The narrative then delves into a poignant flashback of the narrator's conversation with his mother shortly before her death. She recounted a tragic story to the narrator about the narrator's father and his younger brother who died in a racially motivated hit-and-run accident. The father's guilt over failing to protect his brother left a lasting emotional scar. That is to say, the narrator's uncle. The mother implores the narrator to take care of Sonny, emphasizing the importance of familial responsibility. This moment is pivotal as it underscores the narrator's guilt and shame for failing to fulfill his mother's request and sets up his emotional journey, his arc that he needs to take to reconnect with Sonny and try to understand Sonny. Towards that end, in the present, the brothers begin to open up to one another during a car ride. The narrator asks Sonny about his addiction, trying to understand what drove him to heroin. Sonny explains that drugs were a way to cope with the overwhelming pain and darkness he felt. He describes his inner struggles and how heroin provided a temporary escape, even as it trapped him in a destructive cycle. Sonny also speaks about his love for music, particularly jazz and blues, as his true source of salvation. Music, he explains, allows him to channel his pain and find meaning in his experiences. The narrator listens intently, beginning to see Sonny's world in a new light. The conversation that they have here deepens as Sonny shares his philosophy on suffering. He tells the narrator that everyone experiences pain, but some people are more equipped to express it. For Sonny, music becomes a language of his pain, a way to make sense of the chaos inside of him, of managing all this trauma that he himself has experienced. He admits that playing music is both a release and a form of self-imposed discipline, keeping him from succumbing entirely to despair. Highlighting again this kind of duality of factors and elements at play, right? Music as both discipline, music as both joy and release. The narrator reflects on his own suffering, particularly the loss of his daughter, and realizes that he and Sonny are more alike than he had acknowledged or realized or had cared to see. This moment of shared vulnerability bridges the emotional gap between the brothers. Then, the story's emotional climax occurs when Sonny takes the narrator to a nightclub where he'll perform. The narrator, initially an outsider to this world, observes the intimate camaraderie among the musicians and their shared understanding of the struggles they express through music. As Sonny begins to play, the narrator is deeply moved by the raw emotion and power of the performance. Sonny's music becomes a vessel for his pain, transforming it, transmuting it, changing it into something beautiful and transcendent, right? This pain into joy, this sorrow into discipline. The narrator realizes that the blues Sonny's plays are not just personal, but also communal, right? Trying to bring the community together, speaking to the community, the audience of the community, echoing that collective suffering of their family, their community, and the broader African-American experience, as Baldwin often speaks about in his writing. And so, as the music builds, the narrator experiences a profound moment of epiphany. He imagines the weight of Sonny's burden and the burdens of their shared history, all that weight, all that pain, all that trauma, both personal, generational, communal. He imagines this weight, and Baldwin uses vivid imagery to describe this realization, comparing Sonny's music to a cup of trembling. This biblical reference underscores the fragility of life and the redemptive potential of art, right? Finding that release, finding that discipline, finding that joy, finding that taming of pain in art. For the narrator, this performance that Sonny gives is transformative. He understands for the first time how Sonny's music gives voice to his struggles and provides a path to resilience. The brothers achieve a moment of unspoken connection as the narrator sees Sonny not just as his troubled brother, but as a fully realized individual navigating a harsh world. No longer is he just his little brother who he saw as kind of like messing up and being a drug addict. Rather, he sees him as an individual who is completely unique in his own way, has his own strengths, his own weaknesses, as a completely fully independent individual aside from him that can make this way in the world without his guidance and his judgment, right? But it helps him realize that he does need to be there to support Sonny. So, in that note, the story ends on an ambiguous but hopeful note. The narrator continues to listen to Sonny's music, feeling a mixture of sorrow and admiration, and through the music, he comes to terms with with their shared pain and the strength it takes to survive going forward, right? They both have had a ton in their lives, right? From the death of the narrator's daughter to the trauma their fathers experienced and the loss of their uncle, to Sonny being imprisoned and in jail for his drug addiction challenges. And so he realizes they have so much more in common and that they need each other and strengthen that to survive. And so the final image in the story is of Sonny's playing, his music filling the room, suggesting that while suffering is inevitable, it can also be a source of beauty, expression, connection, compassion, and ultimately a mode that heals relationships that have come from great challenges, and art is a vehicle of these connections being reforged through mutual understanding and compassion and love. And now I want to talk about some of these stories, themes we touched upon, but a little bit more in depth and with pulling out some quotes as well. So first, let's look at suffering as a universal and transformative experience as a theme. So suffering in Sonny's Blues operates on a personal, familial, and collective level. Baldwin shows how pain is both isolating and connective, shaping the characters' lives and relationships. For example, considering personal suffering and its expression, Sonny confesses to the narrator, "It's terrible sometimes. Inside, you can't get it out. And if it doesn't come out, it'll destroy you." This statement lays bare the emotional turmoil Sonny endures and underscores the necessity of self-expression as a means of survival. The inability to articulate pain, Sonny suggests, leads to self-destruction, which manifests for him in his drug addiction. The narrator, in contrast, initially suppresses his emotions. Reflecting on his daughter's death, he says, "My trouble made his real." This admission is pivotal, as it marks the first time the narrator truly emphasizes with Sonny's struggles. Baldwin uses this narrator's shift in perspective to highlight the power of shared suffering as a catalyst for understanding and connection. Collective suffering in Harlem is also a key consideration, as Baldwin expands this theme of suffering to include systemic oppression faced by the Black community in Harlem. The narrator reflects on the young boys in his neighborhood. "These boys now were living as we'd been living. They were growing up with a rush and their heads bumped abruptly against the low ceiling of their actual possibilities." The imagery of the low ceiling conveys the limitations imposed by systemic racism and poverty, which stifle ambition and perpetuate cycles of despair. Sonny's music becomes a vehicle for articulating this collective pain. In the nightclub scene, the narrator observes, "Sonny's Blues began to make sense." This recognition signals his realization that Sonny's music is not just a personal catharsis, but also an expression of communal anguish and resilience. For a scholarly perspective on this, John M. Riley in Black American Literature Forum describes Baldwin's portrayal of suffering as both personal and collective, transcending individual pain to address a universal human condition. Riley argues that Baldwin situates individual suffering within broader social contexts, using it as a means to foster empathy and connection across divides. Their next theme, number 2, the redemptive power of art. Art, particularly music, emerges as a transformative force in the story, offering solace and a means of survival for both Sonny and the community. Music as survival and communication is something key to consider as well. So Sonny says, "Sometimes you'll do anything to play, even if it means dying." This statement reflects the vital role of music in his life, underscoring how it serves as both a refuge and a necessity. For Sonny, music is not just a passion, but a lifeline, enabling him to externalize his struggles and find meaning in them. The narrator's epiphany comes during Sonny's performance. Sonny's fingers filled the air with life, his life, but that life contained so many others. Here, Baldwin emphasizes the communal nature of Sonny's art. His music transcends his personal pain, resonating with the experience of others and creating a shared emotional space. The transformative nightclub scene is also a key piece of context in this discussion on this theme, because during the nightclub scene, the narrator describes the power of Sonny's music. Sonny's music seemed to soothe something in the musicians, as though they were being rescued from the sea. This metaphor of rescue captures the redemptive power of art, which allows individuals to confront and process their pain. Sonny's music becomes a form of salvation, not just for himself, but for everyone who listens. In terms of scholarly perspective on this theme, James Takach, in Studies in Short Fiction, links Sonny's music to the African-American tradition of the blues, which transforms suffering into beauty and resilience. Takach notes, through Sonny's music, Baldwin connects personal and communal struggles, situating them within a historical continuum of African-American survival and creativity. Our third theme we're discussing now is family, brotherhood, and responsibility. The story's exploration of familial relationships reveals the complexity of love, duty, and reconciliation, and this is focused in part on the narrator's emotional distance initially. The narrator admits, "I hadn't wanted to know." This confession highlights the emotional detachment from Sonny's struggles that the narrator initially has. His reluctance to feel or acknowledge or realize some of these elements of his emotional detachedness comes from a combination of fear, judgment, and a lack of understanding, illustrating the barriers that often exist within familiar relationships towards understanding the people we're closest to and the struggles they experience. Their mother's pleas, that is the narrator's and Sonny's mother, she says, "You gotta hold on to your brother and don't let him fall," establishes the narrator's sense of responsibility towards Sonny. However, Baldwin complicates his duty, showing how love and understanding are not automatic but require effort and vulnerability, something that requires work, not just something that you do because you just do it, right? It's something that does take work, as all relationships do take work, effort, and vulnerability. This is also something to consider in terms of this idea of reconciliation through music and art. The narrator's transformation culminates during Sonny's performance when he reflects, "Sonny's world was shaking and it would never stop, but what shook him now was what he tried to tell me." This moment signifies the narrator's realization that Sonny's struggles are an inseparable part of who he is. By truly listening to Sonny's music, the narrator fulfills his mother's request, not just by holding on to Sonny, but by finally seeing him as he is. Trudy Harris in Black Women in Fiction and Poetry observes that Baldwin's portrayals of familiar relationship emphasizes the necessity of empathy and understanding as the foundation for reconciliation. Harris argues that the narrator's journey mirrors Baldwin's broader themes of human connection and the redemptive power of love. In terms of our fourth theme, race, oppression, and the Harlem experience, Baldwin situates the story within the socio-political context of Harlem, using the setting as both a character and a symbol. So if we look at Harlem as a microcosm of these larger thematic elements, the narrator reflects, "The darkness outside is what the old folks have been talking about. It's what they've come from. It's what they endure." The description of Harlem evokes both physical and metaphorical darkness, symbolizing the systemic barriers faced by its residents. Baldwin portrays Harlem as a site of both cultural richness and systemic neglect, capturing its duality through the characters' lives. Sonny's struggles with addiction and his resilience on music can be seen as responses to this oppressive environment. His music transforms the despair of Harlem into something beautiful, offering a glimmer of hope amidst the darkness. Cora Kaplan in James Baldwin, America and Beyond, argues that Baldwin uses Harlem as a microcosm of African American life, portraying its complexities with unflinching honesty. Kaplan notes, Baldwin challenges readers to confront the structural inequalities shaping his characters' lives while celebrating the resilience and creativity of the community. Fifth theme, number 5, identity, self-discovery, and meaning. The story explores the character's journeys towards self-understanding and the role of expression in forging identity. So Sonny's artistic identity in this context, let's look at that. When Sonny tells the narrator, "I think people ought to do what they want to do. What else are they alive for?" This assertion reflects Sonny's belief in the importance of authenticity and self-expression. His music then becomes a vehicle for discovering and asserting his identity, allowing him to navigate his struggles and define himself on his own terms. In terms of the narrator's transformation, his journey mirrors Sonny's. He moves from repression and detachment to understanding and reconnection. He reflects, Sonny's blues began to make sense. This realization signifies his ability to empathize with Sonny's struggles and recognize the transformative power of his brother's art. And through this understanding, the narrator achieves his own sense of emotional liberation and the ability to actually feel his feelings and care for his brother and truly fulfill his mother's wishes. Richard Albert, in The Soul of James Baldwin, argues that Baldwin's exploration of identity in Sonny's Blues reflects his broader themes of authenticity and self-realization. Albert writes, "The tension between Sonny's artistic expression and the narrator's initial repression highlights the challenges of self-discovery and the transformative potential of empathy." James Baldwin's Sonny's Blues masterfully interweaves themes of human suffering, art, family, and racial identity into a poignant exploration of human connection. And these quotes show these deeper layers of meaning relating to this broader theme of transformative power of music towards fostering the necessity of empathy in overcoming division, establishing that understanding to heal that individual, generational, and communal trauma. As we can see, many scholars also contributed to this conversation, discussing all these different elements and themes as well. And again, what Baldwin affirms this story is the power of art, love, and understanding to transcend pain and foster connection, and in this case, reconnection. Now, let's do a little bit of a character analysis as well. Let's dig into the character stuff a little bit more with some specific quotes that we can point to, and let's revisit our character analysis. So, right, in Sonny's Blues, James Baldwin crafts complex characters who grapple with these themes of suffering, identity, and connection, and through the narrator and his brother Sonny, Baldwin explores how individuals navigate these personal pains, these familial bonds, and societal pressures. So, with that in mind, let's take a look at some of these, and let's also talk about, what some of the scholarship has to say about this as well. So, right, let's talk about the narrator and his character arc from a journey of emotional distance and detachment to understanding and reconnection with his brother Sonny and himself and his community even. So the unnamed narrator, Sonny's elder brother, functions as both a lens for the story and a dynamic character who undergoes profound personal transformation. Initially, he represents a more traditional stable path, but struggles with emotional repression and judgment. So the narrator essentially represents this idea of representation of stability and repression at the same time, right? Repressing these feelings for the sake of survival and stability, even though ultimately he's not necessarily processing these feelings and emotions in the right way, leading him to have this sort of character arc where he realizes that he needs to open himself up emotionally further. So, the narrator is a Harlem school teacher who has carved out a relatively secure life. Early in the story, he reflects, "I was sure that the first time Sonny had ever had horse, he couldn't have been much older than these boys are now." This observation reveals his tendency to judge Sonny, projecting his fears for the students onto his brother, and vice versa. His focus on Sonny's failures rather than his struggles suggests an emotional detachment and an ability to confront pain, both Sonny's and his own. However, the narrator's life is not devoid of suffering. After the death of his young daughter Grace, he confesses, "My trouble mate is real." This admission marks a turning point as his personal grief bridges the emotional gap between him and Sonny, and the narrator begins to empathize with Sonny's pain, recognizing the universality of suffering. And this leads to the narrator's transformation through Sonny's music. So the narrator's final transformation occurs during Sonny's nightclub performance when he observes, "Sonny's fingers filled the air with life, his life, but that life contained so many others." Here he realizes that Sonny's music transcends personal expression, embodying the shared pain and resilience of their community. And finally, by truly listening to Sonny, the narrator gains this insight into Sonny's struggles and, by extension, his own. This moment of connection symbolizes reconciliation and mutual understanding. Now, Sonny, on the other hand, kind of represents this thematic element of the idea of the artist and the outcast, right? Sonny is a deeply introspective and sensitive character whose struggles with addiction and identity drive much of the story's emotional weight. His journey reflects both the challenges of individual expression, but also the redemptive power of art. And just the self-awareness and the strength to get out of a dark place like that. And this dark place specifically being Sonny's struggles with addictions, right? Sonny's heroin addiction is both a coping mechanism and a manifestation of his inner turmoil, again, of his personal trauma, his communal trauma, his generational trauma. He explains to the narrator, "It's terrible sometimes inside. You can't get it out. And if it doesn't come out, it will destroy you." And so the statement highlights his acute awareness of his emotional vulnerability and his overall vulnerability and the lack of safety that he experiences and is lived by, and his need for an outlet, right? Heroin became this temporary escape, this temporary safe haven, albeit that's one that isolated further from those who might have supported him, as well as community, and as well as perpetuated the systemic oppressions that were designed to keep him from moving past problems such as this and falling into problems such as this. So he needs to find, right, a different outlet, one that actually helps him heal rather than one that hurts him. So Baldwin avoids reducing Sonny to a stereotype in this way, instead portraying his addiction as a symptom of systemic oppression and personal pain. This cyclical nature of addiction mirrors the cyclical despair of Harlem, where opportunities for escape are limited, but again, right, that still has its own beauty to unlock in Harlem. So in terms of Sonny's artistic identity, for Sonny, music is both salvation and self-expression. He tells the narrator, "It's the only thing I want to do with my life. Sometimes you'll do anything to play, even if it means dying." This declaration shows the life or death stakes of his art, which allows him to confront and transform his suffering. During the climactic nightclub scene, Sonny's music becomes a powerful medium of communication. The narrator observes, "Sonny's blues seem to soothe something in the musicians, as though they were being rescued from the sea." So this metaphor of rescue suggests that Sonny's music not only saves him, but also offers solace to others. It becomes a communal act, bridging individual and collective experience. In terms of character, it's also important to examine this dynamic between the brothers themselves, right? So the relationship between the narrator and Sonny is totally central to the story. It reflects these themes of misunderstanding and understanding and reconciliation and love and all these different kinds of traumas, right? And it also highlights how there's often misunderstandings and judgment in close relationships, right? The narrator's early interactions with Sonny's are marked by a lack of understanding. He admits, "I hadn't wanted to know." This reluctance stems from his own fears and inability to confront his brother's pain. His judgments, rooted in societal expectations and just the idea of what one needs to do to survive as a person of color, creates emotional distance between them because he can't see where Sonny is coming from. He can only see his own methods of survival and self-preservation and preserving his sanity in such a deeply troubled existence and fraught existence, where one wrong step can land one in jail and derail their life, as what happened with Sonny. And so eventually, though, however, the two brothers' relationships is bridged through reconciliation via empathy, right? This reconciliation, although it's gradual and reluctant initially, is facilitated by the shared suffering and the narrator's willingness to finally listen to Sonny. The narrator's realization, Sonny's world was shaking and it would never stop. But what shook him now was what he had tried to tell me. That encapsulates this shift in perspective. By truly hearing Sonny, the narrator not only stands his brother, but also gains a deeper awareness of himself and their shared humanity and their shared experiences and the hope for their shared future. We'll talk about Harlem as a character in its own right more in depth in a moment, but Harlem functions in his character too. It shapes the lives and identities of the narrator and Sonny. It has a duality to it, its vibrancies and struggles, parallels with the brothers' experiences, right? Sonny's music, rooted in the blues jazz traditions of Harlem, becomes a response to its challenges, turning pain into beauty and resistance. So here's some insights from literary scholars on the idea of thematic elements specifically related to character. In Black Women in Fiction and Poetry, Trudia Harris notes Baldwin's portrayal of familiar relationships emphasizes the necessity of empathy and understanding as a foundation for reconciliation. Harris argues that the narrator's journey mirrors Baldwin's broader themes of human connection and the redemptive power of love. James Tacok, on music and identity, in his studies in short fiction, links Sonny's music to the African-American tradition of blues, where he writes, "Through Sonny's music, Baldwin connects personal and communal struggles, situating them within a historical continuum of African-American survival and creativity." Cora Kaplan, in James Baldwin's America and Beyond, Beyond argues that Harlem functions as a microcosm of African-American life, portraying its complexities with unflinching honesty. Kaplan's highlights Baldwin's ability to depict Harlem as both a source of struggle and a wellspring of cultural richness. John M. Riley in Black American Literature Forum describes Baldwin's portrayal of suffering as both personal and collective, transcending individual pain to address the universal human condition. He notes that Baldwin situates individual struggles within broader social context, fostering empathy and connection across divides. And so through the narrator and Sonny, Baldwin explores the themes of suffering, identity, and connection in Sonny's blues. We see the narrator's journey and character arc from judgment to understanding to connection and reconnection, and Sonny's reliance on music as salvation to highlight the complexity of human relationships and the transformative power of art as the driving character arcs of the stories. So overall, Baldwin just affirms the necessity of empathy and expression, navigating life's hardships and forging meaningful connections through the brothers as individuals, their own individual characters' arcs, and the healing they must do individually and together to reform as brothers and begin to serve as positive forces within their community, thus healing this, beginning the process of healing or addressing this individual / personal, communal, and generational trauma. So let's talk about further to Place's character more specifically, which I mentioned a bit prior. So, right, in this case, Harlem is more than just a mere backdrop for the story. It becomes a living, breathing entity, a character in its own right, and it shapes the lives and memories and identities of Sonny and the narrator. Baldwin's evocative portrayal of Harlem transforms it into a powerful symbol of both confinement and creativity, pain, possibility, shaping the narrative's themes and emotional resonance. So Place is doing a lot more than just being a place. Again, Place is functioning as a character. So in one sense, we can see it as a force of entrapment. Harlem in Baldwin's story is depicted as an oppressive environment, one that mirrors the struggles of its inhabitants. The narrator describes the streets as dark and filled with sad, raggy little houses and young men who are trapped in darkness. This imagery captures a sense of claustrophobia and inevitability. For the narrator, Harlem represents cycles of suffering, addiction, poverty, and violence that seem inescapable, particularly for young black men like Sonny. Baldwin writes, "It's always at the hour of trouble and confrontation that the street outside becomes most vivid," emphasizing how the environment intensifies the pain the characters endure. The school where the narrator teaches symbolizes a continuation of this entrapment. The young students in his classroom, though not explicitly connected to Sonny, are described in ways that echo Sonny's youthful struggles. The narrator sees in them the beginnings of disillusionment, shaped by the same oppressive environment that influenced his brother. Thus, Harlem operates as a site where dreams are suffocated under the weight of systemic racism and socioeconomic hardship. Harlem is also sort of a repository of memory. It's inextricably linked to the narrator's past, serving as a repository of personal and communal memory. Every corner of the neighborhood is steeped in the history of his family and community. As the narrator walks the streets, he recalls his childhood, his father's stories, and the tragic loss of his daughter. Baldwin connects Harlem's physical space to the narrator's emotional world, blending external surroundings with internal reflections. One poignant memory involves the narrator's conversation with Sonny's childhood friend who has succumbed to addiction. This encounter sets against the backdrops of Harlem's decaying streets, reveals the relentless grip the place has on its residents. The friend's struggle highlight Harlem's role as a crucible of suffering, where individual lives are shaped by a collective history of deprivation and resilience. And so there's this duality of Harlem. Harlem's embodies a profound duality. It's both a place of despair and a source of artistic and emotional power. It's a place of beauty and creation as well as a place of addiction and destruction. So this duality is mirrored in Sonny's own life. For Sonny, Harlem is both the site of his struggles with addiction and the space that fuels his music. The narrator, reflecting on the cycles of life in Harlem, notes that the darkness outside is what the old folks have been talking about, connecting the neighborhood's physical and emotional environment to a shared legacy of endurance. And again, like we talked about before, right, it's got both that generational trauma, that communal trauma, as well as that individual trauma, but also that generational, communal, and individual creation and beauty and art and freedom through art and beauty. Harlem's duality also manifests in the narrator's evolving perspective on his brother. Initially, he sees Harlem through the lens of his own fears and judgment, viewing Sonny as a victim of the environment. However, as he listens to Sonny's music, he begins to perceive the redemptive potential of the very same streets that once seemed suffocating. Music is the soul of Harlem and Sonny's blues, giving voice to the community's pain and resilience. So this idea of looking at Harlem as character, this idea of the power music has within this place and place as character is an important consideration. Jazz and blues become the language through which Sonny expresses his struggles, drawing on the cultural vitality of Harlem to create something transcendent. Baldwin's description of Sonny's performance in the nightclub highlights Harlem's capacity for transformation. The nightclub, a small, intimate space within the larger neighborhood, becomes a sanctuary where suffering is articulated and shared. In this setting, Harlem's oppressive weight is momentarily lifted, right? In this safe space where they can share this communal, individual, and generational trauma and transmute it in a way that uplifts them rather than continues to oppress them, right? The music connects Sonny to his brother and their shared experience of loss, while also uniting the community in a collective act of catharsis. Baldwin writes, Sonny's fingers filled the air with life, his life, but that life contains so many others, and Sonny's blues filled the room. Here, Harlem is not just a place of despair, but also a crucible of creativity and solidarity. Harlem as character, further, too, is ultimately Harlem operates as an active character in the story, shaping and responding to the lives of its residents, and embodies the contradictions of life for Black Americans, both the pain inflicted by systemic oppression and the strength drawn from cultural and communal bonds. For the narrator and Sonny, Harlem is a space that both confines and liberates, wounds and heals, a space of destruction and creation, beauty and joy. Again, all these pairs of opposites, these pairs of duality that ultimately come together to mend relationships through shared understanding, communal and individual and generational responsibility. By the end of this story, Harlem's complexity mirrors the brothers' relationships, fraught with misunderstanding, yet imbued with the potential for connection and redemption. So again, in Sonny's Blues, Baldwin's portrayal of Harlem transcends mere setting to become character in its own right. Harlem shapes the narrative's themes of suffering, resilience, and identity, serving as both antagonist and ally. Through its streets, sounds, and memories, Baldwin illustrates how place is intricately tied to the human experience, shaping not only the struggles of its inhabitants, but also their capacity for growth and transcendence. Here we are at our audiobook reading of Sonny's Blues, written by James Baldwin. I read about it in the paper, in the subway, on my way to work. I read it, and I couldn't believe it, and I read it again. Then perhaps I just stared at the newsprint spelling out his name, spelling out the story. I stared at it in the swinging lights of the subway car, and in the faces and bodies of the people, and in my own face, trapped in the darkness which roared outside. It was not to be believed, and I kept telling myself that, as I walked from the subway station to the high school, and at the same time I couldn't doubt it. I was scared for Sonny. He became real to me again. A great block of ice got settled in my belly and kept melting there slowly all day long while I taught my classes algebra. It was a special kind of ice. It kept melting, sending trickles of ice water all up and down my veins, but it never got less. Sometimes it hardened and seemed to expand until I felt my guts were going to come spilling out, or that I was going to choke or scream. This would always be at a moment when I was remembering some specific thing Sonny had once said or done. When he was about as old as the boys in my classes, his face had been bright and open. There was a lot of copper in it, and he had wonderfully direct brown eyes and great gentleness and privacy. I wonder what he looked like now. He had been picked up the evening before in a raid on an apartment downtown for peddling and using heroin. I couldn't believe it, but what I mean by that is that I couldn't find any room for it anywhere inside me. I had kept it outside me for a long time. I hadn't wanted to know. I had had suspicions, but I didn't name them. I kept putting them away. I told myself that Sonny was wild, but he wasn't crazy. And he'd always been a good boy. He hadn't ever turned hard or evil or disrespectful, the way kids can, so quick, especially in Harlem. I didn't want to believe that I'd ever see my brother going down, coming to nothing, all that light in his face gone out, in the condition I'd already seen so many others. Yet it had happened, and here I was, talking about algebra to a lot of boys who might, every one of them for all I knew, be popping off needles every time they went to the head. Maybe it did more for them than algebra could. I was sure that the first time Sonny had ever had horse, he couldn't have been much older than these boys were now. These boys, now, were living as we'd been living then. They were growing up with a rush and their heads bumped abruptly against the low ceiling of their actual possibilities. They were filled with rage. All they really know were two darknesses, the darkness of their lives, which was now closing in on them, and the darkness of the movies, which had blinded them to that other darkness, and in which they now, vindictively, dreamed at once more together than they were at any other time, and more alone. When the last bell rang, the last class ended, I let out my breath. It seemed I'd been holding it for all that time. My clothes were wet. I may have looked as though I'd been sitting in a steam bath, all dressed up, all afternoon. I sat alone in the classroom a long time. I listened to the boys outside, downstairs, shouting and cursing and laughing. Their laughter struck me for perhaps the first time. It was not the joyous laughter which God knows why one associates with children. It was mocking and insular. Its intent was to denigrate. It was disenchanted, and in this also lay the authority of their curses. Perhaps I was listening to them because I was thinking about my brother, and in them I heard my brother and myself. One boy was whistling a tune, at once very complicated and very simple. It seemed to be pouring out of him as though he were a bird, and it sounded very cool and moving through all that harsh, bright air, only just holding its own through all those other sounds. I stood up and walked over to the window and looked down into the courtyard. It was the beginning of the spring, and the sap was rising in the boys. A teacher passed through them every now and again, quickly, as though he or she couldn't wait to get out of that courtyard, to get those boys out of their sight and off their minds. I started collecting my stuff. I thought I'd better get home and talk to Isabel. The courtyard was almost deserted by the time I got downstairs. I saw this boy standing in the shadow of a doorway, looking just like Sonny. I almost called his name, and then I saw that it wasn't Sonny, but somebody we used to know, a boy from around our block. He'd been Sonny's friend. He'd never been mine, having been too young for me, and, anyway, I'd never liked him. And now, even though he was a grown-up man, he still hung around that block, still spent hours on the street corners, was always high and raggy. I used to run into him from time to time, and he'd often work around to asking me for a quarter or 50 cents. He always had some real good excuse, too, and I always gave it to him. I don't know why. But now, abruptly, I hated him. I couldn't stand the way he looked at me, partly like a dog, partly like a cunning child. I wanted to ask him what the hell he was doing in the school courtyard. He sort of shuffled over to me and he said, "I see you got the papers, so you already know about it." "You mean about Sonny?" "Yes, I already know about it. How come they didn't get you?" He grinned. It made him repulsive, and it also brought to mind what he looked like as a kid. "I wasn't there. I'll stay away from them people." "Good for you." I offered him a cigarette, and I watched him through the smoke. "You come all the way down here just to tell me about Sonny?" "That's right." He was sort of shaking his head, and his eyes looked strange, as though they were about to cross. The bright sun deadened his damp dark brown skin, and it made his eyes look yellow, and showed up the dirt in his kinked hair. He smelled funky. I moved a little away from him, and I said, "Well, thanks, but I already know about it, and I gotta get home." "I'll walk you a little ways," he said. We started walking. There were a couple of lads still loitering in the courtyard, and one of them said goodnight to me and looked strangely at the boy beside me. "What are you going to do?" he asked me. I mean about Sonny. "Look, I haven't seen Sonny for over a year. I'm not sure I'm going to do anything. Anyway, what the hell can I do?" "That's right," he said quickly. "Ain't nothing you can do. Can't much help old Sonny no more, I guess." It was what I was thinking, and so it seemed to me he had no right to say it. "I'm surprised at Sonny, though." He went on. He had a funny way of talking. He looked straight ahead as though he were talking to himself. I thought Sonny was a smart boy. I thought he was too smart to get hung. I guess he thought so too, I said sharply, and that's how he got hung. And how about you? You're pretty goddamn smart, I bet. Then he looked directly at me, just for a minute. I ain't smart, he said. If I was smart, I'd have reached for a pistol a long time ago. Look, don't tell me your sad story. If it was up to me, I'd give you one. Then I felt guilty. Guilty, probably, for never having supposed that that poor bastard had had a story of his own, much less a sad one, and I asked, quickly, what's going to happen to him now? He didn't answer this. He was off by himself someplace. Funny thing, he said, and from his tone we might have been discussing the quickest way to get to Brooklyn. When I saw the papers this morning, the first thing I asked myself was if I had anything to do with it. I felt sort of responsible. I began to listen more carefully. The subway station was on the corner just before us, and I stopped. He stopped, too. We were in front of a bar, and he ducked slightly, peering in, but whoever he was looking for didn't seem to be there. The jukebox was blasting away with something black and bouncy, and I half-watched the barmaid as she danced her way from the jukebox to her place behind the bar. And I watched her face as she laughingly responded to something someone said to her, still keeping time to the music. When she smiled, one saw the little girl, one sensed the doomed, still struggling woman beneath the battered face of the semi-whore. I never give Sonny nothing, the boy said finally. But a long time ago I come to school high and Sonny asked me how it felt. He paused. I couldn't bear to watch him. I watched the barmaid, and I listened to the music which seemed to be causing the pavement to shake. I told him it felt great. The music stopped. The barmaid paused and watched the jukebox until the music began again. It did. All this was carrying me to some place I didn't want to go. I certainly didn't want to know how it felt. It filled everything, the people, the houses, the music, the dark, quicksilver barmaid with menace. And this menace was their reality. What's going to happen to him now? I asked again. They'll send him away someplace and they'll try to cure him. He shook his head. Maybe he'll even think he's kicked the habit. Then they let him loose. He gestured, throwing his cigarette into the gutter. That's all. What do you mean, that's all? But I knew what he meant. I mean, that's all. He turned his head and looked at me, pulling down the corners of his mouth. Don't you know what I mean? He asked softly. How the hell would I know what you mean? I almost whispered it. I don't know why. That's right, he said to the air. How would he know what I mean? He turned toward me again, patient and calm, and yet I somehow felt him shaking as though he were going to fall apart. I felt that ice in my guts again, the dread I'd felt all afternoon, and again I watched the barmaid moving about the bar, washing glasses and singing. Listen, they'll let him out and then it'll just start all over again. That's what I mean. You mean they'll let him out, and then he'll just start working his way back in again? You mean he'll never kick the habit? Is that what you mean? That's right, he said cheerfully. You see what I mean. Tell me, I said at last. Why does he want to die? He must want to die. He's killing himself. Why does he want to die? He looked at me in surprise. He licked his lips. He don't want to die. He wants to live. Don't nobody want to die. Ever. Then I wanted to ask him too many things. He could not have answered, or if he had, I could not have borne the answers. I started walking. Well, I guess it's none of my business. It's going to be rough on old Sonny, he said. We reached the subway station. This is your station? He asked. I nodded. I took one step down. Damn, he said suddenly. I looked up at him. He grinned again. Damn if I didn't leave all my money home. You ain't got $1 on you, have you? Just for a couple days is all. All at once something inside me gave and threatened to come pouring out of me. I didn't hate him anymore. I felt that in another moment I'd start crying like a child. Sure, I said. Don't sweat. I looked in my wallet and didn't have $1. I only had a 5. Here, I said. That hold you? He didn't look at it. He didn't want to look at it. A terrible, closed look came over his face as though he were keeping the number on the bill a secret from him and me. Thanks, he said, and now he was dying to see me go. Don't worry about Sonny. Maybe I'll write him or something. Sure, I said. You do that. So long. Be seeing you, he said. I went on down the steps. And I didn't write Sonny or send him anything for a long time. When I finally did, it was just after my little girl died. He wrote me back a letter which made me feel like a bastard. Here's what he said. Dear brother, you don't know how much I needed to hear from you. I wanted to write you many a time, but I dug how much I must have hurt you, and so I didn't write. But now I feel like a man who's been trying to climb up out of some deep, real deep and funky hole, and just saw the sun up there, outside. I gotta get outside. I can't tell you much about how I got here. I mean, I don't know how to tell you. I guess I was afraid of something, or I was trying to escape from something, and you know I've never been very strong in the head. Smile. I'm glad Mama and Daddy are dead and can't see what's happened to their son, and I swear if I'd known what I was doing, I would never have hurt you so. You, and a lot of other fine people who were nice to me and who believed in me. I don't want you to think it had anything to do with me being a musician. It's more than that, or maybe less than that. I can't get anything straight in my head down here, and I try not to think about what's going to happen to me when I get outside again. Sometimes I think I'm going to flip and never get outside, and sometimes I think I'll come straight back. I tell you one thing, though. I'd rather blow my brains out than go through this again. But that's what they all say, so they tell me. If I tell you when I'm coming to New York, and if you could meet me, I sure would appreciate it. Give my love to Isabel and the kids, and I was sure sorry to hear about little Gracie. I wish I could be like Mama and say the Lord's will be done. But I don't know, it seems to me that trouble is the one thing that never does get stopped, and I don't know what good it does to blame it on the Lord. But maybe it does some good, if you believe it. Your brother, Sonny. Then I kept in constant touch with him, and I sent him whatever I could, and I went to meet him when he came back to New York. When I saw him, many things I thought I had forgotten came flooding back to me. This was because I had begun, finally, to wonder about Sonny, about the life that Sonny lived inside. This life, whatever it was, had made him older and thinner, and it had deepened the distant stillness in which he had always moved. He looked very unlike my baby brother. Yet, when he smiled, when we shook hands, the baby brother I'd never known looked out from the depths of his private life, like an animal waiting to be coaxed into the light. How you been keeping? He asked me. All right. And you? Just fine. He was smiling all over his face. It's good to see you again. It's good to see you. The 7 years difference in our ages lay between us like a chasm. I wondered if these years would ever operate between us as a bridge. I was remembering, and it made it hard to catch my breath, that I had been there when he was born, and I had heard the first words he had ever spoken. When he started to walk, he walked from my mother straight to me. I caught him just before he fell when he took the first steps he ever took in this world. How's Isabel? Just fine. She's dying to see you. And the boys? They're fine too. They're anxious to see their uncle. Oh, come on. You know they don't remember me. Are you kidding? Of course they remember you. He grinned again. We got into a taxi. We had a lot to say to each other, far too much to know how to begin. As the taxi began to move, I asked, You still want to go to India? He laughed. You still remember that? Hell no. This place is Indian enough for me. It used to belong to them, I said. And he laughed again. They damn sure knew what they were doing when they got rid of it. Years ago, when he was around 14, he'd been all hipped on the idea of going to India. He read books about people sitting on rocks, naked, in all kinds of weather, but mostly bad, naturally, and walking barefoot through hot coals and arriving at wisdom. I used to say that it sounded to me as though they were getting away from wisdom as fast as they could. I think he sort of looked down on me for that. Do you mind, he asked, if we have the driver drive alongside the park, on the west side? I haven't seen the city in so long. Of course not, I said. I was afraid that I might sound as though I were humoring him, but I hoped he wouldn't take it that way. So we drove along, between the green of the park and the stony, lifeless elegance of hotels and apartments building toward the vivid, killing streets of our childhood. These streets hadn't changed, though housing projects jutted up out of them now, like rocks in the middle of a boiling sea. Most of the houses in which we had grown up had vanished, as had the stores from which we had stolen, the basements in which we had first tried sex, the rooftops from which we had hurled tin cans and bricks. But houses exactly like the houses of our past yet dominated the landscape. Boys exactly like the boys we once had been found themselves. Smothering in these houses, came down into the streets for light and air and found themselves encircled by disaster. Some escaped the trap, most didn't. And those who got out always left something of themselves behind, as some animals amputate a leg and leave it in the trap. It might be said, perhaps, that I had escaped. After all, I was a school teacher, or that Sonny had. He hadn't lived in Harlem for years. Yet, as the cab moved uptown through streets which seemed with a rush to darken with dark people, and as I covertly studied Sonny's face, it came to me that what we both were seeking through our separate cab windows was that part of ourselves which had been left behind. It's always at the hour of trouble and confrontation that the missing member aches. We hit 110th Street and started rolling up Lenox Avenue, and I'd known this avenue all my life, but it seemed to me again, as it had seemed on the day I'd first heard about Sonny's trouble, filled with a hidden menace which was its very breath of life. "We almost there," said Sonny. Almost. We were both too nervous to say anything more. We live in a housing project. It hasn't been up long. A few days after it was up, it seemed uninhabitably new. Now, of course, it's already run down. It looks like a parody of the good, clean, faceless life. God knows the people who live it do their best to make it a parody. The beat-looking grass lying around isn't enough to make their lives green. The hedges will never hold out the streets, and they know it. The big windows fool no one. They aren't big enough to make space out of no space. They don't bother with the windows. They watch the TV screen instead. The playground is most popular with the children who don't play at jacks or skip rope or roller skate or swing, and they can be found in it after dark. We moved in partly because it's not too far from where I teach, and partly for the kids. But it's really just like the houses in which Sonny and I grew up. The same things happen. They'll have the same things to remember. The moment Sonny and I started into the house, I had the feeling that I was simply bringing him back into the danger he had almost died trying to escape. Sonny has never been talkative, so I don't know why I was sure he'd be dying to talk to me when supper was over the first night. Everything went fine. The oldest boy remembered him, and the youngest boy liked him, and Sonny had remembered to bring something for each of them. And Isabel, who is really much nicer than I am, more open and giving, had gone to a lot of trouble about dinner, and was genuinely glad to see him. And she's always been able to tease Sonny in a way that I haven't. It was nice to see her face so vivid again, and to hear her laugh, and watch her make Sonny laugh. She wasn't, or anyway, she didn't seem to be, at all uneasy or embarrassed. She chatted as though there were no subject which had to be avoided, and she got Sonny past his first faint stiffness. And thank God she was there, for I was filled with that icy dread again. And everything I did seemed awkward to me, and everything I said sounded freighted with hidden meaning. And I was trying to remember everything I'd heard about dope addiction, and I couldn't help watching Sonny for signs. I wasn't doing it out of malice. I was trying to find out something about my brother. I was dying to hear him tell me he was safe. "Safe?" my father grunted, whenever Mama suggested trying to move to a neighborhood which might be safer for children. "Safe? Hell, ain't no place safe for kids, nor nobody." He always went on like this, but he wasn't ever really as bad as he sounded, not even on the weekends when he got drunk. As a matter of fact, he was always on the lookout for something a little better. But he died before he found it. He died suddenly during a drunken weekend in the middle of the war when Sonny was 15. He and Sonny hadn't ever got on too well, and this was partly because Sonny was the apple of his father's eye. It was because he loved Sonny so much and was frightened for him that he was always fighting with him. It doesn't do any good to fight with Sonny. Sonny just moves back, inside himself, where he can't be reached. But the principal reason that they never hit it off is that they were so much alike. Daddy was big and rough and loud-talking, just the opposite of Sonny, but they both had that same privacy. Mama tried to tell me something about this just after Daddy died. I was home on leave from the army. This was the last time I ever saw my mother alive. Just the same, this picture gets all mixed up in my mind with pictures I had of her when she was younger. And the way I always see her is the way she used to be on a Sunday afternoon, say when the old folks were talking after the big Sunday dinner. And I always see her wearing pale blue. She'd be sitting on the sofa, and my father would be sitting in the easy chair not far from her, and the living room would be full of church folks and relatives. And there they sit, in chairs all around the living room, and the night is creeping up outside, but nobody knows it yet. You can see the darkness growing against the window panes, and you hear the street noises every now and again, or maybe the jangling beat of a tambourine from one of the churches close by, but it's real quiet in the room. For a moment nobody's talking, but every face looks darkening, like the sky outside, and my mother rocks a little from the waist, and my father's eyes are closed. Everyone is looking at something a child can't see. For a minute, they've forgotten the children. Maybe a kid is lying on the rug, half asleep. Maybe somebody's got a kid in his lap and is absent-mindedly stroking the kid's head. Maybe there's a kid, quiet and big-eyed, curled up in a big chair in the corner. The silence, the darkness coming, and the darkness in the faces frightens the child obscurely. He hopes that the hand which strokes his forehead will never stop, will never die. He hopes that there will never come a time when the old folks won't be sitting around the living room, talking about where they've come from, and what they've seen, and what's happened to them and their kinfolk. But something deep and watchful in the child knows that this is bound to end, is already ending. In a moment someone will get up and turn on the light. Then the old folks will remember the children, and they won't talk anymore that day. And when light fills the room, the child is filled with darkness. He knows that every time this happens, he's moved just a little closer to that darkness outside. The darkness outside is what the old folks have been talking about. It's what they've come from. It's what they endure. The child knows that they won't talk anymore, because if he knows too much about what's happened to them, he'll know too much too soon about what's going to happen to him. The last time I talked to my mother, I remember I was restless. I wanted to get out and see Isabel. We weren't married then, and we had a lot to straighten out between us. There, Mama sat, in black, by the window. She was humming an old church song. Lord, you brought me from a long ways off. Sonny was out somewhere. Mama kept watching the streets. I don't know, she said, if I'll ever see you again after you go off from here. But I hope you'll remember the things I tried to teach you. Don't talk like that, I said and smiled. You'll be here a long time yet. She smiled too, but she said nothing. She was quiet for a long time, and I said, Mama, don't you worry about nothing. I'll be writing all the time, and you be getting the checks. I want to talk to you about your brother, she said suddenly. If anything happens to me, he ain't going to have nobody to look out for him. Mama, I said, ain't nothing going to happen to you or Sonny. Sonny's all right. He's a good boy, and he's got good sense. It ain't a question of his being a good boy, Mama said, nor of his having good sense. It ain't only the bad ones, nor yet the dumb ones that get sucked under. She stopped, looking at me. Your daddy once had a brother, she said, and she smiled in a way that made me feel she was in pain. You didn't ever know that, did you? No, I said. I never knew that, and I watched her face. Oh, yes, she said. Your daddy had a brother. She looked out of the window again. I know you never saw your daddy cry, but I did, many a time, through all these years. I asked her, what happened to his brother? How come nobody's ever talked about him? This was the first time I ever saw my mother look old. His brother got killed, she said, when he was just a little younger than you are now. I knew him. He was a fine boy. He was maybe a little full of the devil, but he didn't mean nobody no harm. Then she stopped and the room was silent, exactly as it had sometimes been on those Sunday afternoons. Mama kept looking out into the streets. He used to have a job in the mill, she said, and like all young folks he just liked to perform on Saturday nights. Saturday nights, him and your father would drift around to different places, and go to dances and things like that, or just sit around with people they knew, and your father's brother would sing. He had a fine voice, and play along with himself on his guitar. Well, this particular Saturday night, him and your father was coming home from some place, and they were both a little drunk, and there was a moon that night. It was bright like day. Your father's brother was feeling kind of good, and he was whistling to himself, and he had his guitar slung over his shoulder, and he was coming down a hill, and beneath them was a road that turned off from the highway. Well, your father's brother, being always kind of frisky, decided to run down this hill, and he did, with that guitar banging and clanging behind him, and he ran across the road, and he was making water behind a tree. And your father was sort of amused at him, and he was still coming down the hill, kind of slow.
Then he heard a car motor, and that same minute his brother stepped from behind the tree into the road in the moonlight. And he started to cross the road, and your father started to run down the hill. He says he don't know why. This car was full of white men. They was all drunk, and when they seen your father's brother, they let out a great whoop and holler, and they aimed the car straight at him. They was having fun. They just wanted to scare him, the way they do sometimes, you know. But they was drunk. And I guess the boy, being drunk too, and scared, kind of lost his head. By the time he jumped, it was too late. Your father says he heard his brother scream when the car rolled over him, and he heard the wood of that guitar when it give, and he heard them strings go flying, and he heard them white men shouting, and the car kept on a-going, and it ain't stopped till this day. And, time your father got down the hill, his brother went nothing but blood and pulp. Tears were gleaming on my mother's face. There wasn't anything I could say. "He never mentioned it," she said, "because I never let him mention it before you children. Your daddy was like a crazy man that night and for many a night thereafter. He says he never in his life seen anything as dark as that road after the lights on that car had gone away. Weren't nobody on that road, just your daddy and his brother and that busted guitar. Oh yes, your daddy never did really get right again. Till the day he died, he weren't sure but that every white man he saw was the man that killed his brother." She stopped and took out her handkerchief and dried her eyes and looked at me. "I ain't telling you all this," she said, "to make you scared or bitter or to make you hate nobody. I'm telling you this because you got a brother, and the world ain't changed." I guess I didn't want to believe this, and I guess she saw this in my face. She turned away from me, toward the window again, searching those streets. "I praise my Redeemer," she said at last, "that he called your daddy home before me. I ain't saying it to throw no flowers at myself, but, I declare, it keeps me from feeling too cast down to know I helped your father get safely through this world. Your father always acted like he was the roughest, strongest man on earth, and everybody took him to be like that. But if he hadn't had me there to see his tears..." She was crying again. Still I couldn't move. I said, Lord, Mama, I didn't know it was like that." "Oh, honey," she said, "there's a lot that you don't know, but you are going to find out." She stood up from the window and came over to me. "You gotta hold on to your brother," she said, "and don't let him fall no matter what it looks like is happening to him, and no matter how evil you gets with him. You're going to be evil with him many a time, but don't you forget what I told you. You hear?" "I won't forget," I said. "Don't you worry, I won't forget. I won't let nothing happen to Sonny." My mother smiled as though she were amused at something she saw in my face. Then, "You may not be able to stop nothing from happening, but you gotta let him know you's there." 2 days later I was married, and then I was gone, and I had a lot of things on my mind, and I pretty well forgot my promise to Mama until I got shipped home on a special furlough for her funeral. And after the funeral, with just Sonny and me alone in the empty kitchen, I tried to find out something about him. "What do you want to do?" I asked him. "I'm going to be a musician," he said, for he had graduated, in the time I had been away, from dancing to the jukebox to finding out who was playing what and what they were doing with it, and he had bought himself a set of drums. "You mean you want to be a drummer?" I somehow had a feeling that being a drummer might be all right for other people, but not for my brother Sonny. "I don't think," he said, looking at me very gravely, "that I'll ever be a good drummer. But I think I can play a piano." I frowned. I had never played the role of the older brother quite so seriously before. I'd scarcely ever, in fact, ask Sonny a damn thing. I sensed myself in the presence of something I didn't really know how to handle, didn't understand. So I made my frown a little deeper as I asked, "What kind of musician do you want to be?" He grinned. "How many kinds do you think there are?" "Be serious," I said. He laughed, throwing his head back, and then looked at me. "I am serious." "Well then, for Christ's sake, stop kidding around and answer a serious question. I mean, do you want to be a concert pianist? Do you want to play classical music and all that? Or what?" Long before I finished, he was laughing again. "For Christ's sake, Sonny." He sobered, but with difficulty. "I'm sorry, but you sound so scared." And he was off again. "Well, you may think it's funny now, baby, but it's not going to be so funny when you have to make your living at it, let me tell you that." I was furious because I knew he was laughing at me, and I didn't know why. No, he said, very sober now, and afraid, perhaps, that he'd hurt me. I don't want to be a classical pianist. That isn't what interests me. He paused, looking hard at me, as though his eyes would help me to understand, and then gestured helplessly, as though perhaps his hand would help. I'll have a lot of studying to do, and I'll have to study everything, but, I want to play with jazz musicians. He stopped. I want to play jazz, he said. Well, the word had never before sounded as heavy, as real, as it sounded that afternoon in Sonny's mouth. I just looked at him, and I was probably frowning a real frown by this time. I simply couldn't see why on earth he'd want to spend his time hanging around nightclubs, clowning around on bandstands, while people pushed each other around a dance floor. It seemed beneath him somehow. I had never thought about it before. I had never been forced to, but I suppose I had always put jazz musicians in a class with what Daddy called good time people. Are you serious? Hell yes, I'm serious. He looked more helpless than ever, and annoyed and deeply hurt. I suggested, helpfully, You mean like Louis Armstrong? His face closed as though I'd struck him. No, I'm not talking about none of that old-time down-home crap. Well, look, Sonny, I'm sorry. Don't get mad. I just don't altogether get it. That's all. Name somebody. A jazz musician you admire. Bird. Who? Bird. Charlie Parker. Don't they teach you nothing in the goddamn army? I lit a cigarette. I was surprised and then a little amused to discover that I was trembling. I've been out of touch, I said. You'll have to be patient with me. Now, who's this Parker character? He's just one of the greatest jazz musicians alive, said Sonny, sullenly, his hands in his pocket, his back to me. Maybe the greatest. He added bitterly, That's probably why you never heard of him. All right, I said. I'm ignorant, I'm sorry. I'll go out and buy all the Cat's records right away, all right? It don't, said Sonny with dignity, make any difference to me. I don't care what you listen to. Don't do me no favors. I was beginning to realize that I'd never seen him so upset before. With another part of my mind, I was thinking that this would probably turn out to be one of those things kids go through and that I shouldn't make it seem important by pushing it too hard. Still, I didn't think it would do any harm to ask. Doesn't all this take a lot of time? Can you make a living at it? He turned back to me and half leaned, half sat on the kitchen table. Everything takes time, he said. And, well, yes, sure, I can make a living at it. But what I don't seem to be able to make you understand is that it's the only thing I want to do. Well, Sonny, I said gently, people can't always do exactly what they want to do. No, I don't know that, said Sonny, surprising me. I think people ought to do what they want to do. What else are they alive for? You getting to be a big boy, I said desperately. It's time you started thinking about your future. I'm thinking about my future, said Sonny grimly. I think about it all the time. I gave up. I decided if he didn't change his mind that we could always talk about it later. In the meantime, I said, you gotta finish school. We had already decided that he'd have to move in with Isabel and her folks. I knew this wasn't the ideal arrangement because Isabel folks are inclined to be dicty and they hadn't especially wanted Isabel to marry me, but I didn't know what else to do. And we have to get you fixed up at Isabel's. There was a long silence. He moved from the kitchen table to the window. That's a terrible idea. You know it yourself. Do you have a better idea? He just walked up and down the kitchen for a minute. He was as tall as I was. He had started to shave. I suddenly had the feeling that I didn't know him at all. He stopped at the kitchen table and picked up my cigarettes. Looking at me with a kind of mocking, amused defiance, he put one between his lips. You mind? You smoking already? He lit the cigarette and nodded, watching me through the smoke. I just wanted to see if I'd have the courage to smoke in front of you. He grinned and blew a great cloud of smoke to the ceiling. It was easy. He looked at my face. Come on now, I bet you was smoking at my age. Tell the truth. I didn't say anything, but the truth was on my face, and he laughed. But now there was something very strained in his laugh. Sure, and I bet that ain't all you was doing. He was frighting me a little. Cut the crap, I said. We already decided that you was going to go and live at Isabel's. Now what's got into you all of a sudden? You decided it, he pointed out. I didn't decide nothing. He stopped in front of me, leaning against the stove, arms loosely folded. Look, brother, I don't want to stay in Harlem no more. I really don't. He was very earnest. He looked at me, then over toward the kitchen window. There was something in his eyes I'd never seen before, some thoughtfulness, some worry all his own. He rubbed the muscle of one arm. It's time I was getting out of here. Where do you want to go, Sonny? I want to join the army, or the navy, I don't care. If I say I'm old enough, they'll believe me. Then I got mad. It was because I was so scared. You must be crazy, you goddamn fool. What the hell do you want to go and join the army for? I just told you to get out of Harlem. Sonny, you haven't even finished school, and if you really want to be a musician, how do you expect to study if you're in the army? He looked at me, trapped and in anguish. There's ways. I might be able to work out some kind of deal. Anyway, I'll have the GI Bill when I come out. If you come out. We stared at each other. Sonny, please, be reasonable. I know the setup is far from perfect, but we gotta do the best we can. I ain't learning nothing in school, he said, even when I go. He turned away from me and opened the window and threw his cigarette out into the narrow alley. I watched his back. At least I ain't learning nothing you'd want me to learn. He slammed the window so hard I thought the glass would fly out and turned back to me, and I'm sick of the stink of these garbage cans. Sonny, I said, I know how you feel, but if you don't finish school now, you're going to be sorry later that you didn't. I grabbed him by the shoulders. And you only got another year. It ain't so bad, and I'll come back, and I swear I'll help you do whatever you want to do. Just try to put up with it till I come back. Will you please do that? For me? He didn't answer, and he wouldn't look at me. Sonny, you hear me? He pulled away. I hear you, but you never hear anything I say. I didn't know what to say to that. He looked out of the window and then back at me. Okay, he said inside. I'll try. Then I said, trying to cheer him up a little, I got a piano at Isabel's. You can practice on it. And as a matter of fact, it did cheer him up for a minute. That's right, he said to himself. I forgot that. His face relaxed a little, but the worry, the thoughtfulness, played on it still, the way shadows play on a face which is staring into the fire. But I thought I'd never hear the end of that piano. At first Isabel would write me, saying how nice it was that Sonny was so serious about his music and how, as soon as he came in from school, or wherever he had been when he was supposed to be at school, he went straight to that piano and stayed there until supper time, and, after supper, he went back to that piano and stayed there until everybody went to bed. He was at the piano all day Saturday and all day Sunday. Then he bought a record player and started playing records. He'd play one record over and over again, all day long sometimes, and he'd improvise along with it on the piano, or he'd play one section of the record, one chord, one change, one progression, then he'd do it on the piano, then back to the record, then back to the piano. Well, I really don't know how they stood it. Isabel finally confessed that it wasn't like living with a person at all. It was like living with a sound, and the sound didn't make any sense to her, didn't make any sense to any of them, naturally. They began, in a way, to be afflicted by this presence that was living in their home. It was as though Sonny were some sort of god or monster. He moved in an atmosphere which wasn't like theirs at all. They fed him, and he ate, he washed himself, he walked in and out of their door. He certainly wasn't nasty or unpleasant or rude. Sonny isn't any of those things. But it was as though he were all wrapped up in some cloud, some fire, some vision all his own, and there wasn't any way to reach him. At the same time, he wasn't really a man yet. He was still a child, and they had to watch out for him in all kinds of ways. They certainly couldn't throw him out. Neither did they dare to make a great scene about that piano, because even they dimly sensed, as I sensed, from so many thousands of miles away, that Sonny was at the piano playing for his life. But he hadn't been going to school. One day a letter came from the school board, and Isabel's mother got it. There had apparently been other letters, but Sonny had torn them up. This day, when Sonny came in, Isabel's mother showed him the letter and asked him where he'd been spending his time, and she finally got it out of him that he'd been down in Greenwich Village with musicians and other characters in a white girl's apartment. And this scared her, and she started to scream at him, and what came up, when she began, though she denies it to this day, was what sacrifices they were making to give Sonny a decent home and how little he appreciated it. Sonny didn't play the piano that day. By evening, Isabel's mother had calmed down, but then there was the old man to deal with, and Isabel herself. Isabel says she did her best to be calm, but she broke down and started crying. She says she just watched Sonny's face. She could tell, by watching him, what was happening with him, and what was happening was that they had penetrated his cloud. They had reached him. Even if their fingers had been 1,000 times more gentle than human fingers ever are, he could hardly help feeling that they had stripped him naked and were spitting on that nakedness. For he also had to see that his presence, that music, which was life or death to him, had been torture for them, and that they had endured it, not at all for his sake, but only for mine. And Sonny couldn't take that. He can take it a little better today than he could then, but he's still not very good at it, and, frankly, I don't know anybody who is. The silence of the next few days must have been louder than the sound of all the music ever played since time began. One morning, before she went to work, Isabel was in his room for something, and she suddenly realized that all of his records were gone. And she knew for certain that he was gone. And he was. He went as far away as the Navy would carry him. He finally sent me a postcard from some place in Greece, and that was the first I knew that Sonny was still alive. I didn't see him anymore until we were both back in New York and the war had long been over. He was a man by then, of course, but I wasn't willing to see it. He came by the house from time to time, but we fought almost every time we met. I didn't like the way he carried himself, loose and dreamlike all the time, and I didn't like his friends, and his music seemed to be merely an excuse for the life he led. It sounded just that weird and disordered. Then we had a fight, a pretty awful fight, and then I didn't see him for months. By and by I looked him up, where he was living, in a furnished room in the village, and I tried to make it up. But there were lots of people in the room, and Sonny just lay on his bed, and he wouldn't come downstairs with me, and he treated these other people as though they were his family, and I weren't. So I got mad, and then he got mad, and then I told him that he might just as well be dead as live the way he was living. Then he stood up and he told me not to worry about him anymore in life, that he was dead as far as I was concerned. Then he pushed me to the door, and the other people looked on as though nothing were happening, and he slammed the door behind me. And I stood in the hallway staring at the door. I heard somebody laugh in the room, and then the tears came to my eyes. And I started down the steps, whistling to keep from crying. I kept whistling to myself, "You gonna need me, baby, one of these cold, rainy days." And I read about Sonny's trouble in the spring. Little Grace died in the fall. She was a beautiful little girl, but she only lived a little over 2 years. She died of polio, and she suffered. She had a slight fever for a couple of days, but it didn't seem like anything, and we just kept her in bed. And we would certainly have called the doctor, but the fever dropped. She seemed to be all right, so we thought it had just been a cold. Then one day, she was up playing. Isabel was in the kitchen fixing lunch for the 2 boys when they'd come in from school, and she heard Grace fall down in the living room. When you have a lot of children, you don't always start running when one of them falls, unless they start screaming or something. And this time, Grace was quiet. Yet Isabel says that when she heard that thump and that silence, something happened in her to make her afraid. And she ran to the living room, and there was little Grace on the floor, and all twisted up, and the reason she hadn't screamed was that she couldn't get her breath. And when she did scream, it was the worst sound, Isabel says, that she'd ever heard in all her life, and she still hears it sometimes in her dreams. Isabel will sometimes wake me up with a low, moaning, strangled sound, and I have to be quick to awaken her and hold her to me, and where Isabel is weeping against me seems a mortal wound. I think I may have written Sonny the very day that little Grace was buried. I was sitting in the living room in the dark, by myself, and I suddenly thought of Sonny. My trouble made his real. One Saturday afternoon, when Sonny had been living with us, or anyway, been in our house for nearly 2 weeks, I found myself wandering aimlessly about the living room, drinking from a can of beer, and trying to work up the courage to search Sonny's room. He was out. He was usually out whenever I was home, and Isabel had taken the children to see their grandparents. Suddenly I was standing still in front of the living room window, watching 7th Avenue. The idea of searching Sonny's room made me still. I scarcely dared to admit to myself what I'd be searching for. I didn't know what I'd do if I found it, or if I didn't. On the sidewalk across from me, near the entrance to a barbecue joint, some people were holding an old-fashioned revival meeting. The barbecue cook, wearing a dirty white apron, his conked hair reddish and metallic in the pale sun, and a cigarette between his lips, stood in the doorway, watching them. Kids and older people paused in their errands and stood there, along with some older men and a couple of very tough-looking women who watched everything that happened on the avenue, as though they owned it, or were maybe owned by it. Well, they were watching this, too. The revival was being carried on by 3 sisters in black and a brother. All they had were their voices and their Bibles and a tambourine. The brother was testifying, and while he testified, 2 of the sisters stood together, seeming to say, Amen, and the 3rd sister walked around with a tambourine outstretched, and a couple of people dropped coins into it. Then the brother's testimony ended, and the sister who had been taking up the collection dumped the coins into her palm and transferred them to the pocket of her long black robe. Then she raised both hands, striking the tambourine against the air, and then against one hand, and she started to sing. And the 2 other sisters and the brother joined in. It was strange, suddenly, to watch, though I had been seeing these street meetings all my life. So, of course, had everybody else down there. Yet, they paused and watched and listened, and I stood still at the window. "'Tis the old ship of Zion," they sang, and the sister with the tambourine kept a steady jangling beat. "It has rescued many a thousand." Not a soul under the sound of their voices was hearing this song for the first time. Not one of them had been rescued, nor had they seen much in the way of rescue work being done around them. Neither did they especially believe in the holiness of the 3 sisters and the brother. They knew too much about them, knew where they lived, and how. The woman with the tambourine, whose voice dominated the air, whose face was bright with joy, was divided by very little from the woman who stood watching her, a cigarette between her heavy, chapped lips, her hair a cuckoo's nest, her face scarred and swollen from many beatings, and her black eyes glittering like coal. Perhaps they both knew this, which was why, when, as rarely, they addressed each other as sister. As the singing filled the air, the watching, listening faces underwent a change, the eyes focusing on something within. The music seemed to soothe the poison out of them, and time seemed, nearly, to fall away from the sullen, belligerent, battered faces, as though they were fleeing back to their first condition, while dreaming of their last. The barbecue cook half shook his head and smiled and dropped his cigarette and disappeared into his joint. A man fumbled in his pockets for change and stood holding it in his hand impatiently, as though he had just remembered a pressing appointment further up the avenue. He looked furious. Then I saw Sonny, standing on the edge of the crowd. He was carrying a wide, flat notebook with a green cover, and it made him look from where I was standing, almost like a schoolboy. The coppery sun brought out the copper in his skin. He was very faintly smiling, standing very still. Then the singing stopped. The tambourine turned into a collection plate again. The furious man dropped in his coins and vanished. So did a couple of the women, and Sonny dropped some change in the plate, looking directly at the woman with a little smile. He started across the avenue, toward the house. He has a slow, loping walk, something like the way Harlem hipsters walk, only he's imposed on his own half-beat. I had never really noticed it before. I stayed at the window, both relieved and apprehensive. As Sonny disappeared from my sight, they began singing again, and they were still singing when his key turned in the lock. "Hey," he said. "Hey yourself, you want some beer?" "No, well, maybe." But he came up to the window and stood beside me, looking out. "What a warm voice," he said. "And they were singing if I could only hear my mother pray again." "Yes," I said, "and she can sure beat that tambourine." "What a terrible song," he said, and laughed. He dropped his notebook on the sofa and disappeared into the kitchen. "Where's Isabel and the kids?" "I think they went to see their grandparents. You hungry?" "No." He came back into the living room with his can of beer. "You want to come someplace with me tonight?" I sensed, I don't know how, that I couldn't possibly say no. "Sure. Where?" He sat down on the sofa and picked up his notebook and started leafing through it. "I'm gonna sit in with some fellows in a joint in the village." "You mean you're gonna play tonight?" "That's right." He took a swallow of his beer and moved back to the window. He gave me a sidelong look. "If you can stand it." "I'll try," I said. He smiled to himself, and we both watched as the meeting across the way broke up. The 3 sisters and the brother, heads bowed, were singing "God Be With You Till We Meet Again." The faces around them were very quiet. Then the song ended, and the small crowd dispersed. We watched the three women and the lone man walk slowly up the avenue. "When she was singing before," said Sonny abruptly. Her voice reminded me for a minute of what heroin feels like sometimes when it's in your veins. It makes you feel sort of warm and cool at the same time, and distant, and sure. He sipped his beer very deliberately, not looking at me. I watched his face. It makes you feel in control. Sometimes you've got to have that feeling. Do you? I sat down slowly in the easy chair. Sometimes. He went to the sofa and picked up his notebook again. Some people do. "In order?" I asked. "To play?" And my voice was very ugly, full of contempt and anger. "Well..." He looked at me with great, troubled eyes, as though, in fact, he hoped his eyes would tell me the things he could never otherwise say. "They think so. And if they think so..." "And what do you think?" I asked. He sat on the sofa and put his can of beer on the floor. "I don't know," he said, and I couldn't be sure if he were answering my question or pursuing his thoughts. His face didn't tell me. It's not so much to play, it's to stand it, to be able to make it at all, on any level. He frowned and smiled, in order to keep from shaking to pieces. "But these friends of yours," I said, "they seem to shake themselves to pieces pretty goddamn fast." "Maybe." He played with the notebook, and something told me that I should curb my tongue, that Sonny was doing his best to talk, that I should listen. "But of course you only know the ones that have gone to pieces. Some don't, or at least they haven't yet, and that's just all about any of us can say." He paused. "And then there are some who just live, really, in hell, and they know it, and they see what's happening, and they go right on. I don't know." He sighed, dropped the notebook, folded his arms. "Some guys, you can tell from the way they play, they on something all the time. And you can see that, well, it makes something real for them. But of course..." He picked up his beer from the floor and sipped it and put the can down again. "They want to, too. You've got to see that. Even some of them that say they don't. Some, not all." "And what about you?" I asked. I couldn't help it. "What about you? Do you want to?" He stood up and walked to the window and remained silent for a long time. Then he sighed. "Me?" he said. Then, while I was downstairs before, on my way here, listening to that woman sing, it struck me all of a sudden how much suffering she must have had to go through to sing like that. It's repulsive to think you have to suffer that much. I said, "But there's no way not to suffer, is there, Sonny?" "I believe not," he said and smiled, "but that's never stopped anyone from trying." He looked at me. "Has it?" I realized, with his mocking look, that there stood between us, forever, beyond the power of time or forgiveness, the fact that I had held silence so long when he had needed human speech to help him. He turned back to the window. "No, there's no way not to suffer. But you try all kinds of ways to keep from drowning in it, to keep on top of it, and to make it seem, well, like you did something, all right, and now you're suffering for it. You know?" I said nothing. "Well, you know," he said impatiently. "Why do people suffer? Maybe it's better to do something to give it a reason, any reason." "But we just agreed," I said, "that there's no way not to suffer. Isn't it better, then, just to take it?" "But nobody just takes it," Sonny cried. "That's what I'm telling you. Everybody tries not to. You're just hung up on the way some people try. It's not your way." The hair on my face began to itch. My face felt wet. "That's not true," I said. "That's not true. I don't give a damn what other people do. I don't even care how they suffer. I just care how you suffer." And he looked at me. "Please believe me," I said. "I don't want to see you die trying not to suffer." "I won't," he said flatly. "Die trying not to suffer. At least not any faster than anybody else." "But there's no need," I said, trying to laugh. "Is there? In killing yourself?" I wanted to say more, but I couldn't. I wanted to talk about willpower and how life could be, well, beautiful. I wanted to say that it was all within, but was it? Or rather, wasn't that exactly the trouble? And I wanted to promise that I would never fail him again. but it would all have sounded empty words and lies, so I made the promise to myself and prayed that I would keep it. It's terrible sometimes, inside, he said. That's what's the trouble. You walk these streets, black and funky and cold, and there's not really a living ass to talk to, and there's nothing shaking, and there's no way of getting it out, that storm inside. You can't talk it, and you can't make love with it, and when you finally try to get with it and play it, you realize nobody's listening. So you've got to listen. You gotta find a way to listen. And then he walked away from the window and sat down on the sofa again, as though all the wind had suddenly been knocked out of him. Sometimes you'll do anything to play, even cut your mother's throat. He laughed and looked at me. Or your brother's. Then he sobered. Or your own. Then, don't worry, I'm alright now, and I think I'll be alright. But I can't forget where I've been. I don't mean just the physical place I've been, I mean where I've been, and what I've been. What have you been, Sonny? I asked. He smiled but sat sideways on the sofa, his elbow resting on the back, his fingers playing with his mouth and chin, not looking at me. I've been something I didn't recognize, didn't know I could be, didn't know anybody could be. He stopped, looking inward, looking helplessly young, looking old. I'm not talking about it now because I feel guilty or anything like that. Maybe it would be better if I did, I don't know. Anyway, I can't really talk about it. Not to you, not to anybody. And now he turned and faced me. Sometimes, you know, and it was actually when I was most out of the world, I felt that I was in it, that I was with it, really, and I could play or I didn't really have to play. It just came out of me. It was there. And I don't know how I play, thinking about it now, but I know I did awful things, those times, sometimes, to people. Or it wasn't that I did anything to them, it was that they weren't real. He picked up the beer can, it was empty, he rolled it between his palms, and other times, well, I needed a fix. I needed to find a place to lean, I needed to clear a space to listen, and I couldn't find it, and I went crazy. I did terrible things to me. I was terrible for me. He began pressing the beer can between his hands. I watched the metal begin to give. It glittered as he played with it, like a knife, and I was afraid he would cut himself, but I said nothing. Oh well, I can never tell you. I was all by myself at the bottom of something, stinking and sweating and crying and shaking, and I smelled it, you know, my stink, and I thought I'd die if I couldn't get away from it, and yet, all the same, I knew that everything I was doing was just locking me in with it, and I didn't know. He paused, still flattening the beer can. I didn't know. I still don't know. Something kept telling me that maybe it was good to smell your own stink, but I didn't think that that was what I'd been trying to do, and who can stand it? And he abruptly dropped the ruined beer can, looking at me with a small, still smile, and then rose, walking to the window as though it were the lodestone rock. I watched his face. He watched the avenue. I couldn't tell you when Mama died, but the reason I wanted to leave Harlem so bad was to get away from drugs. And then, when I ran away, that's what I was running from, really. When I came back, nothing had changed. I hadn't changed. I was just older. And he stopped, drumming with his fingers on the window pane. The sun had vanished. Soon darkness would fall. I watched his face. It can come again, he said, almost as though speaking to himself. Then he turned to me. It can come again, he repeated. I just want you to know that. All right, I said at last. So it can come again. All right. He smiled, but the smile was sorrowful. I had to try to tell you, he said. Yes, I said. I understand that. You're my brother, he said, looking straight at me and not smiling at all. Yes, I repeated. Yes, I understand that. He turned back to the window, looking out. All that hatred down there, he said. All that hatred and misery and love. It's a wonder it doesn't blow the avenue apart. We went to the only nightclub on a short, dark street downtown. We squeezed through the narrow, chattering, jam-packed bar to the entrance of the big room where the bandstand was, and we stood there for a moment, for the lights were very dim in this room and we couldn't see. Then, "Hello, boy," said a voice, and an enormous black man, much older than Sonny or myself, erupted out of all that atmospheric lighting and put an arm around Sonny's shoulders. "I've been sitting right here," he said, "waiting for you." He had a big voice, too, and heads in the darkness turned toward us. Sonny grinned and pulled a little away and said, "Creole, this is my brother. I told you about him." Creole shook my hand. "I'm glad to meet you, son," he said, and it was clear that he was glad to meet me there for Sonny's sake, and he smiled. "You got a real musician in your family," and he took his arm from Sonny's shoulders and slapped him lightly, affectionately, with the back of his hand. "Well, now I've heard it all," said a voice behind us. This was another musician and a friend of Sonny's, a cold, black, cheerful-looking man built close to the ground. He immediately began confiding to me, at the top of his lungs, the most terrible things about Sonny, his teeth gleaming like a lighthouse and his laugh coming up out of him like the beginning of an earthquake. And it turned out that everyone at the bar knew Sonny, or almost everyone. Some were musicians, working there, or nearby, or not working. Some were simply hangers-on, and some were there to hear Sonny play. I was introduced to all of them, and they were all very polite to me. Yet it was clear that, for them, I was only Sonny's brother. Here I was in Sonny's world, or rather, his kingdom. Here it was not even a question that his veins bore royal blood. They were going to play soon, and Creole installed me, by myself, at a table in a dark corner. Then I watched them, Creole and the little black man and Sonny and the others, while they horsed around, standing just below the bandstand. The light from the bandstand spilled just a little short of them, and, watching them laughing and gesturing and moving about, I had the feeling that they, nevertheless, were being most careful not to step into that circle of light too suddenly, that if they moved into the light too suddenly without thinking, they would perish in flame. Then, while I watched, one of them, the small black man, moved into the light and crossed the bandstand and started fooling around with his drums. Then, being funny, and being also extremely ceremonious, Creole took Sonny by the arm and led him to the piano. A woman's voice called Sonny's name, and a few hands started clapping, and Sonny, also being funny and being ceremonious, and so touched, I think, that he could have cried, but neither hiding it nor showing it, riding it like a man, grinned and put both hands to his heart and bowed from the waist. Creole then went to the bass fiddle, and a lean, very bright-skinned brown man jumped up on the bandstand and picked up his horn. So there they were, and the atmosphere on the bandstand and in the room began to change and tighten. Someone stepped up to the microphone and announced them. Then there were all kinds of murmurs. Some people at the bar shushed others. The waitress ran around, frantically getting in the last orders. Guys and chicks got closer to each other, and the lights on the bandstand, on the quartet, turned to a kind of indigo. And they all looked different there. Creole looked about him for the last time, as though he were making certain that all his chickens were in the coop, and then he jumped and struck the fiddle, and there they were. All I know about music is that not many people ever really hear it, and even then, on the rare occasion when something opens within and the music enters, what we mainly hear, or hear corroborated, are personal, private, vanishing evocations. But the man who creates the music is hearing something else, is dealing with a roar rising from the void and imposing order on it as it hits the air. What is evoked in him, then, is of another order, more terrible because it has no words, and triumphant too, for that same reason. And his triumph, when he triumphs, is ours. I had just watched Sonny's face. His face was troubled. He was working hard, but he wasn't with it. And I had the feeling that, in a way, everyone on the bandstand was waiting for him, both waiting for him and pushing him along. But as I began to watch Creole, I realized that it was Creole who held them all back. He had them on a short rein, up there keeping the beat with his whole body, wailing on the fiddle. With his eyes half closed, he was listening to everything, but he was listening to Sonny. He was having a dialogue with Sonny. He wanted Sonny to leave the shoreline and strike out for deep water. He was Sonny's witness that deep water and drowning were not the same thing. He had been there, and he knew, and he wanted Sonny to know. He was waiting for Sonny to do the things on the keys which would let Creole know that Sonny was in the water. And, while Creole listened, Sonny moved, deep within, exactly like someone in torment. I had never before thought of how awful the relationship must be between the musician and his instrument. He has to fill it, this instrument, with the breath of life, his own. He has to make it do what he wants it to do. And a piano is just a piano. It's made out of so much wood and wires and little hammers and big ones and ivory. Well, there's only so much you can do with it. The only way to find this out is to try and make it do everything. And Sonny hadn't been near a piano for over a year, and he wasn't on much better terms with his life, not the life that stretched before him now. He and the piano stammered, started one way, got scared, stopped, started another way, panicked, marked time, started again, then seemed to have found a direction, panicked again, got stuck. And the face I saw on Sonny I'd never seen before. Everything had been burned out of it, and, at the same time, things usually hidden were being burned in by the fire and fury of the battle which was occurring in him up there. Yet, watching Creole's face as they neared the end of the first set, I had the feeling that something had happened, something I hadn't heard. Then they finished. There was scattered applause, and then, without an instant's warning, Creole started into something else. It was almost sardonic. It was, "Am I Blue?" And, as though he commanded, Sonny began to play. Something began to happen, and Creole let out the reins. The dry, low, black man said something awful on the drums. Creole answered, and the drums talked back. Then the horn insisted, sweet and high, slightly detached perhaps, and Creole listened, commenting now and then, dry and driving, beautiful and calm and old. Then they all came together again, and Sonny was part of the family again. I could tell this from his face. He seemed to have found, right there beneath his fingers, a damn brand new piano. It seemed that he couldn't get over it. Then for a while, just being happy with Sonny, they seemed to be agreeing with him that brand new pianos certainly were a gas. And then Creole stepped forward to remind them that what they were playing was the blues. He hit something in all of them. He hit something in me, myself, and the music tightened and deepened. Apprehension began to beat the air. Creole began to tell us what the blues were all about. They were not about anything very new. He and his boys up there were keeping it new, at the risk of ruin, destruction, madness, and death, in order to find new ways to make us listen. For while the tale of how we suffer and how we are delighted, and how we may triumph is never new, it always must be heard. There isn't any other tale to tell. It's the only light we've got in all this darkness. And this tale, according to that face, that body, those strong hands on those strings, has another aspect in every country, and a new depth in every generation. Listen, Creole seemed to be saying, listen. Now these are Sonny's blues. He made the little black man on the drums know it, and the bright, brown man on the horn. Creole wasn't trying any longer to get Sonny in the water. He was wishing him Godspeed. Then he stepped back, very slowly, filling the air with the immense suggestion that Sonny speak for himself. Then they all gathered around Sonny, and Sonny played. Every now and again one of them seemed to say, Amen. Sonny's fingers filled the air with life, his life, but that life contained so many others, and Sonny went all the way back. He really began with a spare, flat statement of the opening phrase of the song. Then he began to make it his. It was very beautiful because it wasn't hurried, and it was no longer a lament. I seemed to hear with what burning he had made it his, with what burning we had yet to make it ours, how we could cease lamenting. Freedom looked around us, and I understood, at last, that he could help us to be free if we would listen, that he would never be free until we did. Yet there was no battle in his face now. I heard what he had gone through, and would continue to go through until he came to rest on earth. He had made it his, that long line, of which we knew only Mama and Daddy, and he was giving it back, as everything must be given back, so that, passing through death, it can live forever. I saw my mother's face again, and felt for the first time how the stones of the road she had walked on must have bruised her feet. I saw the moonlit road where my father's brother died, and it brought something else back to me, and carried me past it. I saw my little girl again, and felt Isabel's tears again, and I felt my own tears begin to rise, and I was yet aware that this was only a moment, that the world waited outside, as hungry as a tiger, and that trouble stretched above us longer than the sky. Then it was over. Creole and Sonny let out their breath, both soaking wet and grinning. There was a lot of applause, and some of it was real. In the dark, the girl came by, and I asked her to take drinks to the bandstand. There was a long pause while they talked up there in the indigo light, and after a while I saw the girl put a scotch and milk on top of the piano for Sonny. He didn't seem to notice it, but just before they started playing again, he sipped from it and looked toward me and nodded. Then he put it back on top of the piano. For me, then, as they began to play again, it glowed and shook above my brother's head, like the very cup of trembling.
All right, now that we've finished the story and reading through it, let's talk about how Sonny's Blues fits into the broader works of James Baldwin. So, James Baldwin's Sonny's Blues is a keystone text within his body of work, reflecting his enduring concerns with themes of suffering, racial identity, familial relationship, the transformative power of art, and the weight of systemic oppression. This story exemplifies Baldwin's ability to weave intimate narratives with larger socio-political realities, creating characters and settings that resonate far beyond the page. By examining Baldwin's reflections, close readings of the story, and the insights of literary scholars, we can situate Sonny's Blues within the broader framework of his literary and philosophical contributions. So, one thing Baldwin often writes about is suffering as a shared human experience. So, Baldwin consistently viewed suffering as both deeply personal and inherently universal. In his essay Notes of a Native Son, Baldwin states, "You think your pain and your heartbreak are unprecedented in the history of the world, but then you read. It was books that taught me that the things that tormented me most were the very things that connected me with the people who were alive, or would ever been alive." Both Sonny and the narrator are shaped by suffering, though they process it in profoundly different ways. The narrator initially distanced himself from his pain, suppressing it to maintain control over his life as a teacher and father. He acknowledges, "I had kept it outside me for a long time. I had wanted to know." Here, Baldwin highlights the human tendency to avoid confronting deep emotional wounds. The narrator's reluctance mirrors societal attempts to suppress the realities of racial and personal suffering. His awakenings begin with the death of his daughter, which forces him to confront his pain and seek a connection with Sonny. Baldwin suggests that only through facing suffering, rather than avoiding it, can one achieve understanding and empathy. Sonny, in contrast, embraces his pain, channeling it into his music. He describes the necessity of expression. "It's terrible sometimes inside. You've got to find a way to listen." That line illustrates Baldwin's belief that art provides a vital outlet for confronting and articulating pain. Sonny's music transforms his suffering into something meaningful, allowing him to connect with others, including his brothers. Baldwin's broader philosophy, evident in works like The Fire Next Time, posits that reckoning with suffering is both a personal and collective imperative. So Harlem as a character and a force is another element that comes up in Baldwin's writing, right? In Baldwin's works, Harlem often transcends its role as a setting to become an active force that shapes the lives of its inhabitants. Baldwin himself describes Harlem as a place of both profound creativity and crushing oppression. And in an interview with Studs Terkel, he stated, "Harlem is not a place, it is a condition of despair that breeds resilience and creativity. It constantly threatens to devour its people." This duality is evident in Sonny's Blues, where the narrator reflects on the cycles of poverty and despair that trap Harlem's youth. These boys now were living as we'd been living. They were growing up with a rush, and their heads bumped abruptly against the low ceiling of their actual possibility. Again, this image of a low ceiling encapsulates the systemic barriers imposed on the community, stifling ambition and perpetuating cycles of despair. Baldwin's portrayal of Harlem mirrors its role in his broader works such as Go Tell It on the Mountain and If Beale Street Could Talk. In these texts, Harlem represents both a crucible of systemic racism and a space where resilience and creativity flourish. In Sonny's Blues, Harlem also serves as a backdrop for the brothers' reconciliation. The narrator walks through Harlem, evokes a sense of continuity as he confronts the environment that shaped both his and Sonny's lives. Baldwin uses Harlem to explore how systemic oppression intertwines with personal struggles, illustrating the inescapable impact of place on identity. The redemptive power of art is also a recurring motif in Baldwin's work, and art specifically, often depicted as a means of survival, self-expression, and resistance. In Notes of a Native Son, Baldwin writes, "The artist's responsibility is to eliminate the darkness, to blaze trails through the murky terrain of human existence, and to create bridges between despair and hope." Sonny's music embodies this philosophy. His performances are not merely acts of self-expression, but also acts of communication, bridging the gap between himself and his brother. In the climactic nightclub scene, the narrator describes Sonny's music. "Sonny's fingers filled the air with life, his life, but that life contained so many others, and Sonny played. Every now and again one of them seemed to say, 'Amen.'" The religious undertones of Amen underscore the sacredness of Sonny's music, its redemptive power. Baldwin portrays art as a transformative force that redeems suffering and fosters connection. The narrator's epiphany during Sonny's performance reflects Baldwin's belief in art's ability to reveal truth about the human condition. Sonny's music allows the narrator to experience his brother's pains and resilience that in a way that words by themselves never could. Family and fractured bonds is also a theme Baldwin frequently explores, these complexities of familiar relationships, often depicting them as fraught with tension, yet essential for understanding and redemption. In The Fire Next Time, he writes, "Love takes off the mask that we fear we cannot live without, and know we cannot live within." This sentiment resonates in Sonny's blues as the narrator and Sonny's gradually unmask their vulnerabilities to each other. Early in the story, the narrator struggles to reconcile his role as an older brother with his inability to protect Sonny, and he admits, "I was scared for Sonny. He became real to me again." This fear reflects the narrator's awakening to the depths of Sonny's struggles as well as his own. Baldwin often depicted love as a force that requires both confrontation and vulnerability. The narrator's eventual willingness to truly see Sonny and listen to his music symbolizes a breaking down of barriers, both personal and relational. In terms of some scholarships, based on the ones we've talked about so far in this video, some right on this topic of this idea of how this work fits into Baldwin's larger oeuvre, as one would say, or body of work. On this idea of suffering and empathy, John M. Riley in Black American Literature Forum writes, "Baldwin's Sonny's Blues demonstrates that individual suffering, while isolating, becomes a mean of connection when it is shared and understood. Baldwin crafts a narrative where empathy becomes a vehicle for redemption." And so Riley's analysis here highlights Baldwin's broader project of using suffering as a bridge between individuals, a theme also central to his essays and novels. James Takach, in Studies in Short Fiction, argues Sonny's music represents Baldwin's understanding of African-American art as both deeply personal expression and a form of communal resistance. Through his music, Sonny transforms his pain into resilience. So Takach's insights here aligns with Baldwin's lifelong belief in art as a tool for survival and resistance against systemic oppression. In terms of family and reconciliation, Trudy A. Harris on Black Women in Fiction and Poetry observes, "The relationship between the narrator and Sonny reflects Baldwin's fascination with the intricate ties of familial love and the responsibility. The reconciliation is a microcosm of Baldwin's larger concern with understanding and forgiveness." And this perspective that Harris highlights here situates the story within Baldwin's broader exploration of familial dynamics, as seen in Go Tell It on the Mountain. So, as we can see here, Sonny's Blues encapsulates James Baldwin's central themes that he often writes about, at least some of them: the universality of suffering, the transformative power of art, the weight of systemic oppression, and the complexities of familial love. Through its vivid depiction of Harlem, its deeply personal narrative, and its profound exploration of music as salvation, the story reflects Baldwin's ability to weave the personal and political into a cohesive whole. As Baldwin himself asserted, the precise role of the artist is to illuminate the darkness, blaze roads through the vast forest, so that we will not, in all our doing, lose sight of its purpose, which is, after all, to make the world a more human dwelling place. This ethos, this credibility, this lived experience, these words that Baldwin crafts permeate Sonny's Blues. His ideas permeate Sonny's Blues, situating it as a cornerstone of Baldwin's literary and philosophical legacy. If this video helped you, or if you enjoyed it, please like it and subscribe to my channel. It helps me to be able to keep supporting you all. If you have any requests for short stories or poetry or summaries and analyses, please let me know in the comments. And just dropping a comment to say thanks or hi also greatly helps me out. Feel free to ask me any questions related to your homework that you think I can help with. Stay lit with Simply Lit.